Wonderful. So I will start by a short introduction of our guest speaker today. First, I'd like to say that Wall Street English has moved 100% online, and now I'm really happy to say that we have started also the um, live events. Traditionally, we always had a guest speaker, and now we are doing our guest speaker event live on Facebook. And our first online guest speaker is Karim Taga, all the way from Vienna. Now the whole world, before we had the guest speakers who were mainly in Tunisia, now we have guest speakers from all over the world, which is really exciting and great. And Karim is a managing partner in the Arthur D. Little, right? Which is an international management consulting firm. He has worked there for 24 years in the telecom practice, and he has been a big supporter of the whole campaign that he'll be talking about, and I'm sure that he will do a much better job of introducing that than me. Yeah, I'm really excited to start this. And if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat box, or you can simply raise your hand, and then we can unmute your microphone and you can actually ask your questions, so we can interact, and you can interact with Karim. Okay, great. Well, on this note, I'm going to pass over to Karim, and yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Irina. It's very nice to introduce me and also to give me the opportunity to talk about our study. As you said, I now been for the company for quite a while, in charge of one particular management consulting practice in telecom industry. However, this initiative I will be talking about is not related necessarily to my industry. It's more, let's say, learnings and lessons we got from multiple stakeholder, and it's a kind of learning from how to lead a business in this COVID-19 crisis. So each one tries to contribute, and I was also thinking with my colleagues in ADL what we could do, brought it to the community. We decided then the best way to do so is probably not to express our own expertise to our clients and tell them how the world should work in the future and what it's about, but actually facilitate the debate between CEOs who are in the front line, and let them share their thoughts and their experience as they're facing this crisis, most of them for the first time. So we decided to interview and select CEOs from 3 countries. Obviously, Singapore and Hong Kong were the 2 markets that managed the growth of the virus expansion very well. As you see, the flattest curve you can see. So we can consider them in the jargon of consulting business best practice. And we always want to learn from best practice what they're doing differently. The second dimension that we look at is what happens if things go really bad. What could be the nightmare scenario? And you can learn also from the nightmare scenario. And we looked at Italy, as Italy had the steep, so to say, expansion. So we said, okay, what do you do in this context, and what would CEO then do differently from the one who has a bit more experience? So as you know, Asia faced already a virus in 2003, SARS, so had a lot of procedures in place, etc. And obviously, for many European, American, and other Asian countries, this was for the first time. So we said, let us talk to the CEO, ask them whether they will be ready to share their experience, and we managed to consolidate all that and put it in a report. So a few minutes ago, I posted the link, and you can download the report and read it. That is, you're most welcome to do so. And this is, so to say, the resume, the summary of all these interviews. We've done roughly 8 to 9 per industry. So we looked at 3 critical infrastructure, what makes the economy still run and work. One is related to the telecoms, one is related to transportation, aviation, railways, etc., automobile as well. And last but not least, telecom. So utilities, energy companies, transportation, and telecom. This is basically the perspective. So again, all the material is already online, and you're happy to download and read the details. I'm happy to share also with you, let's say, this experience we had, and I will guide you through the question we asked, also the learnings we had. And after that, we obviously proposed a solution like every consulting company. So how should the management deal with that, how they should set up, and obviously that was very much influenced by the learnings that we had ourselves. So first of all, I'd like to welcome you all, and probably you can join me thanking and also giving the tribute to all the CEOs who, despite the difficult crisis they had, taking the time to share their perspective. And this is what I would be talking about. If you want, I'm happy to share my screen as well, so that you can see some of the slides I have prepared for you. And please feel free to ask questions. This should be as interactive as possible. I will guide you through the slides and give some anecdotes around that. You have a lot of quotes also from the CEOs. I hope that you can all see my screen now. If you have immediate questions, please feel free to ask. So we started basically the interview with 6 key questions. What's the impact of let's say the crisis in terms of virus impact on the business, on the company, as well as the ecosystem? And it was pretty brutal, because some had kind of business as usual in terms of revenues, a few percentage, let's say, decline. Others had up to 95, 97%. If you're in a business of, let's say, catering of, let's say, airline, and having 50 airlines as customers, and the airlines do not fly anymore, obviously you may lose 97% of your business in a few days. As you know, the airlines stopped. So the impact was quite dramatic for some companies, and for others it was less dramatic, but still you need to anticipate for the future, and I'd like to share with you some of the reflection they had. Obviously what they have done in the immediate situation, and what they're intending to do to respond to the challenge they had. The learning they had identified, especially the one that turned out to be different than expectation in their plans initially, and what personal leadership and challenges they had, and how they were tracking those and tackling those in general. Last but not least, let's say the kind of activity they will do going forward in a rapid, let's say, recovery. What would be then the positive aspects to emerge from the crisis? So basically, these were the key question we asked. Any questions so far? Any hand raised so far? Or should I continue at this speed?
Nothing at the moment. I'm going to check the Facebook and see if there are any questions there. But all for right. now questions.
So basically, the key facts of what we learned from the crisis management are summarized on these slides. So the first one is about crisis steering. So how to mobilize, let's say, quick response from the leadership, and how to deal with that. And what we can see is that the majority of the CEOs had obviously to secure what they call a crisis plan and take decisions within 72 hours, right? So 24 to 72, that was the range in which you take all the most critical decisions, starting with splitting the management into multiple groups, because if one group get affected, you need to make sure that the business can continue. So first of all, secure that let's say, business continuity remains by securing and dividing the teams. So you always had group A and group B, and that went up to the leadership. Also in the leadership, you had to make choices, what is most critical today to deal with, and what is, let's say, less related to the business continuity, but rather related to the functional areas, making sure that your employees, your customers, your key stakeholders are well informed. So you need to secure some plans and make sure that you also secure the process you had in place. Some of them had processes in terms of previous experiences. I was talking about SARS before in Asia. So meaning that you repeat and you basically follow what you have. If you don't have these processes, you have to be very, let's say, agile in taking decisions and defining these processes, as you still need to run a business. So it's typical crisis management. Obviously, one of the key topic is to assign responsibility in making sure that you have a cascade of, let's say, decision makers in case something happens to one of them, that the governance and the decisions are still taken. What is also very relevant in this experience is to keep communicating, because you don't see each other. So you need to find digital platforms and using obviously classical platforms like telephony, but make sure that you're constantly in touch with your peers to keep running the business, despite the fact that you cannot see each other. The second key area is the employees and customers. So make sure that your employees are safe. We're talking about the worst crisis that has ever happened for most of the CEOs, meaning that people die. So we're talking about a lot of, let's say, critical activities you have to put in place to secure your employees. And so you can imagine the health and all the protection that was required, and the investment that were made to secure from gloves and all the necessary equipment to basically provide this to your most exposed employees. If you're in a shop, if you're, let's say, in travel business interfacing with multiple customers, etc., on a daily basis. Also making sure that your customers are safe, making sure that if they come into your retail and or your shop in general, in interacting with the company physically, that you have mechanism to inform the customers that they may be, let's say, infected because some of them was tested positively. So a lot of basic things have been distributed. I'm talking about thermometers. If you don't have thermometers, you need to make sure that you prepare next time to have those in stock, and making sure that you have mechanisms to distribute them. Going up to the mask, and also providing a lot of equipment just to take care of your employees. As you can see in many countries now, the customers are protected by getting a mask in entrance of retail store, etc. So this is a learning that definitely came from the Asian, let's say, CEOs who have much more experience with that. Obviously, communicating intensively with all the stakeholders. We're talking about your employees and your customer. Many of them had challenges, as blue collars are not necessarily equipped with smartphones or even with phone at all. So how do you inform them? Remember, some of them are in the airline business, in the securing the food production for catering. These are employees that are not necessarily well equipped with digital infrastructure. So the question is, how do you inform them when you will restart the business? How do you keep them informed? And what is nice stories we heard about is the level of solidarity that we could experience from the CEOs with regards to putting funds and helping their most, let's say, critical employees in terms of financial critical, to continue to pay their rent, to continue to pay the treatment fee for the school of their kids. So we saw a lot of, let's say, positive behavior, reacting in exceptional manner with donation, with solidarity funds, etc. So it was an exceptional reaction and sign of solidarity in an exceptional situation. Moving on to the next topic around operational business continuity. So as I mentioned before, the separation of the team goes to all levels, and I think it's there you need to physically arrange according to the most critical process to secure the continuity. Managing cash, you need to also assess and eventually help your customer and help your suppliers to stay, let's say, in the ecosystem working end-to-end for you, because there is no point of protecting yourself, securing in at your door all the end-to-end processes if, let's say, they're dependent from other interfaces. And that was very interesting to see how companies were looking at how to help their customer that were in trouble, and how to help their suppliers. So the learning there is very much on rethinking completely the ecosystem. Obviously, many companies were hit by the fact that they had the Chinese suppliers, and the Chinese suppliers just stopped. They were shut down for a while. So how do you continue to manufacture handsets? You can think of all the details of any, let's say, economical ingredients you have in general. If you don't receive, let's say, the spare parts, or if you don't receive the key element for the production. So this is definitely something that will have a long-term impact on how you rethink your supply chain. Probably rely on multiple vendors, not relying on one or two, and also rethink to produce more locally, and we'll discuss about that later on. So the align.
Yeah, there is. Sorry, I thought there was a pause. There was one question that came in. There was how ADL Arthur, I presume Arthur de Little, is overcoming the COVID-19. That's one of the questions that came.
I'll come to that later, and I will definitely cover that point, and also how we managing it. So in terms of operation, what happened naturally is that people were obviously confined and dispatched, and this is also valid for ADL. We had to continue our business remotely, so most of the people were connected. So the digital transformation, I think you all have seen the job circulating. Who is pushing digital transformation? Is it the CEO, the chief digital officer, or COVID-19? And it's clearly COVID-19, because even if government initially were quite reluctant to basically find always good excuses not to, for security reasons, etc., not to use, adopt digital tools, they all have changed and reacted quickly, because they had to. They had to take decisions, they had to run the country. And if you cannot physically move, you have to rely on digital platforms. And the traffic exploded. We're talking about multiple times per day traffic per let's say, operator, thanks to, let's say, the uptake of digital communication, starting with obviously the collaborative tools, sharing presentation like we're doing right now, but also sharing video streams. And you don't share one video stream, you have very often interaction. It's multiple way communication, many to many. So that requires a lot of capacity. So for the telecom operator, they were impacted heavily to invest in their backbone and reroute the traffic smartly to enable the let's say, decent traffic. We also saw that the entertainment platform, whether it's Netflix and others, Amazon and so forth, they had to reduce the quality of their delivery, because they're typically they cover more than 50% of the network capacity. But there were many critical activities going on to support the economy and on the macro level, on the micro level, the corporates, to communicate with their employees, with their clients, that you needed to privilege and give enough, let's say, capacity to these companies. So in that respect, ADL as well had quickly develop tools to help clients to introduce fast and give dedicated training on how to communicate and keep running a business in a remote environment and a confined environment. So we were obviously using all the tools that you know in the consulting business, running workshops, having separate teams, thinking about an idea, bringing them together. All this is done now virtually, so you can set up tasks and assignments to teams. You can monitor them. You can monitor multiple teams as if you'd have a physical person going from one room to the other. But the rooms are virtual. You can see what they do. You can follow. You can intervene. You can draw with them. You can, of course, it will never replace a physical meeting, but it's getting very close. So basically, our role was making sure that we also contribute to the enabling of the, I would call it broadly, ICT and digital adoption, right? And making them comfortable in using the tool, and also contributing to making sure that the business continuity is secure to the max. So we cannot replace, obviously, physical communication and physical interaction, but a lot can be done digitally. And I will come later on again to what ADL does, etc. But this is for us, I cannot say business as usual, but very close to, at least we try to share our, let's say, work through the digital tools as we would be doing it physically. The fourth key fact in the crisis management is definitely interacting with your stakeholders beyond the customer and your employees. You need to master also the interaction with the government and the authorities. It could be regulator, it could be government intervening. As you intervening in your business, why are they intervening in your business? Because if you're a telecom operator, if you're utility business, supplying water or not supplying water makes people, so to say, super damage. Transporting people in delivery, logistic companies, etc. You need to enable this process, otherwise the whole, not economy collapses, but the whole life, so to say, may collapse, because you're delivering critical let's say ingredient, whether it's medicine, you need to transport people to hospitals, etc., etc. So you need to enable that the medical staff can go from point A to point B. All that is part of the critical infrastructure that you need to put in place. And you can imagine that if you're one of these businesses interacting 7 days a week, I'm talking about 7 days, weekly communication is a key task, because they need to know, in case you're in trouble, what kind of, what part of the population and what kind of, let's say, critical life element is in danger. So that is a learning how to set also, let's say, a task force to manage specifically the interaction with the authorities. The authorities are the one also who gives you the guidelines, and also who gives you you need to be compliant, because they legislating rules, and you have to follow these rules very closely. So you need to interpret them and also adapt the processes in your company to make them work as well. Whether respecting distances, whether respecting opening hours, whether respecting what business you can run and what business you have to shut down. So listening to the news is not enough. You need to be much more specific. Also interacting with the government and the regulator when it comes to cash flow management. This is very important, because either the government very much depend on, let's say, the payment you do, or you are basically helping your own customer. You need the cash for your operations, as you have less revenues because of the crisis, and you need to get some allowance for the government. So for multiple reasons, this is a very important stakeholder. And last but not least, I would say that the recovery plan is super important. I will also get into more details, coming back to the question that I was asked. How can ADL help? Many companies have reacted positively to that, and came up with ideas to not only managing the crisis, but making sure that if the crisis continues for a while, at one point it will go up, and there are multiple scenarios there. So if it goes up, you need to have a separate team, you need to have a different, let's say, DNA and spirit to capture eventually the positive opportunity and that will come later. So I think in the post-crisis, the business environment will be very different. So as I mentioned, as the last point, I'd like to elaborate more on that. I think it's very important to focus also in the deepest of your crisis in visualizing the future work environment, learning from the smart working practices, making sure that you enforce a greater level of automation and much more flexible level of working, and ensure that the adoption of the online services becomes much more relevant, and you can even go up to designing product and services remotely, do some diagnostic and testing continuously. Obviously, you need to secure the rapid decision making, as I mentioned before, and delegate much more than you used to do. You always need to look at what are the new opportunities. We know that companies are affected differently. So some of the companies that have a weak balance sheet are very much endangered. So most probably they will not survive the crisis. And this is eventually an opportunity. Their clients or your suppliers probably to consider bridging, supporting them, and eventually acquiring them. So you will have a consolidation post crisis, and it's up to you to define yourself where you want to be acquired or eventually shape the consolidation, acquire other companies. I think the learnings are clearly about preparing crisis in the future. I think most of the companies are prepared for that, and have a business continuity reinforced when it comes to risk management. I think that many of them will be thinking of launching, let's say, a telemedicine project based on that. Many have adapted their business. We could see that in multiple areas. And there is for sure a new impetus to, let's say, design and rethink completely a new ecosystem. So looking ahead, clearly we need to think of a more resilient framework, implement a more dynamic risk management approach, stress testing the current business, and we're in the middle of it, so we don't know what the outcome will be. And last but not least, I would say that the risk velocity and better understanding it will be key, and therefore you need to also adapt your workforce and the supply chain as a critical risk factor. So this is basically the perspective I want to give you on to the report. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. And as you had a question about what it means for ADL, I'm coming to that in a minute. But perhaps you have a question on the different, so to say, perspective I shared on the learnings. And I can give you some quite interesting statement in the meantime while you read the question, Irina, if you want.
Yes, we have a question from Anis, and Anis, I'm going to unmute you so you can actually ask the question and we can have some live interaction. Anis, you're now, you can,
yes,
we
hello.
Can hear you.
You
Hi,
hear me?
we can, yes, we can hear you.
Yes, hello, and thank you for this opportunity. So I wanted to ask Karim about, he mentioned earlier the one alternative to supply chain disruption. He talked about vendor diversification and also local production. Mm-hmm. So how is this a long-term approach, or shall this type of move be implemented on a regional, depending on the government approach as well? Could you give us more?
First of all, thank you very much for the question you asked. I think for the first time, I would say government now are thinking of producing locally again. So you cannot be dependent on all the critical aspects from vendors distributed around the world. So many governments now have taken the decision, for instance, to facilitate mass production. So if you need mask, you cannot wait until China delivers you. They're re-engaging in the production of mask. I'm thinking of basic medicine. A lot of medicine was supplied from China. Many of pharmaceutical, let's say, companies could not supply to their patient regular medicine, and the governments are rethinking of doing so, reproducing, and no matter whether if it's more expensive, but it's part of the strategic supplies you need to have as a country. You have to, in a crisis, make sure that you can deliver. In particular, you have some technology capabilities, and we know that the majority of the production can be produced locally from technical capabilities. It would not take long, 3 to 6 months, to restart this activity. Of course, they will be more expensive because we talk about different volume, but you cannot, I think the biggest learning for government is to understand you cannot, let's say, outsource and be dependent 100% of others. This is not the kind of responsibility as a government you can have. Companies are rethinking as well to build their stock, to diversify the suppliers. Clearly, you cannot do that overnight. There are some lead time, and depending on the product, certain lead times can be a few months, and sometimes, if we talk about semiconductors, etc., it will take a couple of years. Nevertheless, you need to, go through a selection process. You need to test the compatibility with the product specification of what you require. You need to ramp up the production and again, the supply. What is clear is that the single or dual vendor strategy will not work anymore. So I think this will expand much more in the future. But again, I think every country now needs to go down to, let's say, micro level. Every country and company would have to rethink its sourcing strategy and deciding what should be produced locally or nationally, and what can be produced from neighbors. If we consider some geography like European Union or like the GCC, etc. So there are multiple regional perspectives that need to be put into consideration, and what can be imported as usual. So I think if I don't know, just to give an example, I think in a digital environment, if you have a shortage of paper, I'm not sure how critical this is today. If you lack, let's say, antibiotics, that's much more critical. If you lack a mask, that's much more critical. So I hope that I answered your question by trying to segment it. So it's not one size fits all. You need to rethink step by step what, as a government, you should be in charge of, and what is become a liability if there is a crisis. And I believe that the lessons learned we have, this is not the first crisis, nor the last crisis. So we continue to have crises of similar nature in the future. There you have multiple scenarios, people saying that this may come regularly, and that we will not get rid of that. Some are even talking that we will get rid of it in 2024. But this is one of the scenarios, even if it's highly unlikely, but it's still there. And if it's the COVID-19, you may get the next version of COVID-20 or whatever. But people are getting now, let's say, as they have experienced it, they cannot say they've never seen that, and they are caught by surprise. Now they have to prepare and actually act and anticipate. So what we expect from government and also from top executive is to anticipate. They need to anticipate. It was very difficult to predict what happened, but now I think you would be also judged much more on anticipating what may happen in the future. And you have no excuse, if this comes again, to run through the same dramatic situation as we experience it. Any other question? Irina? Thank you for the question, Ms.
Thank you.
And is it okay? Yep.
Yeah, it's fine. Yes. So
Okay.
then we will maybe talk about policy change within government approach by nationalizing maybe some activities.
Thank you
for
yes. I think again we covered critical infrastructures. So critical infrastructures is telecom, utilities, and transportation. So the big discussion I'm having with the holding of government right now. Later than yesterday, I was talking to one of the investment manager of the holding of country, whether the airline should be nationalized or not. And that's a very sensitive topic. You know that major brands, if I look at France, for instance, Air France, I heard a couple of days ago, was evaluated 1.5 billion. Renault is 2 or 5 billion, something very, let's say, approachable. If you think of unicorns being 1 billion, so major brand like that. So can a government like France accept that Chinese companies acquire Renault or Air France for such a price? Shouldn't government like Italy has done with Alitalia nationalize again critical infrastructure? Why? We believe that an airline, we believe that railways, we believe that utility companies are very important. So if in the private space they cannot sustain a crisis like that, you know that Lufthansa is losing 1 million euro an hour. 1 million euro an hour. So you know that we're talking about shutdown that may last until August and September, but then all the airlines will be dead. And Lufthansa was one of the most successful airlines last year. They had, I think, a record, let's say, profit. And if Lufthansa cannot survive after September, it tells you a lot. So who can? So what does it mean? Can a country like Germany, that is very much, let's say, export-oriented, support the fact that they have no airline anymore? Of course, we need to have these companies. And the question is, do you give them money? Is it bailout kind of, as the US have done in the past, in the last crisis with General Motors, etc.? And who do you help, who you don't? The US made a choice. It was 600 billion at the time, right? After the last crisis, and they saved the General Motors. That was under Obama's regime. Who will make this choice? Who will get the bailout, the support, and who will not? And do you give money, or do you take a stake in the company and redesign the company, shape it, support it, and then eventually privatize it again? So all these discussions are on the table.
Amazing, thank you, Karim.
Thank you. And we have a couple of questions from Facebook. One of the questions from Hude, and she's asking is, do you think there would be more integration at the European level for these critical sectors such as airlines, transportation companies, post the crisis?
I think Europe did not show itself from the best perspective, right? Because every country looked at its own, let's say, geography. As you know, the country are confined within the country. You cannot go from one country to the other. If you move border, you need to go in quarantine for 2 weeks. So if you go out and in, basically you lose 1 month these days, right? So the solidarity in that respect wasn't the greatest, because in a crisis, you always try to protect your immediate ecosystem environment. Obviously, a few weeks later, they started to discuss how they can, with the European Central Bank and other heads, how to save the whole economy, because this is becoming much more critical. And as you said, we need to have a more regional thinking. And obviously, the package have been designed by multiple, let's say, stakeholders. So I believe that we will have an aftermath. We'll rediscuss how we could have acted differently. And for sure, after a crisis or during a crisis, because this will take a while, if you do not collaborate and support each other and come up with, let's say, what unites the most, you suffer even more if you remain in a fragmented approach. So I believe that the learnings will be there, and I'm sure that we will have a much more collaborative project for the future. This is my belief. But it takes time to you realize and you agree around the project. For the moment, we need to find, so to say, the element that unites us and bring us forward.
Great, thank you. And the last question, what from Facebook is, what is meant by dynamic risk management approach?
Okay, let me. That's a good transition. I was asked how is Ariel obviously dealing with the whole situation. Let me guide you through the presentation I have prepared for you. And this is also on LinkedIn, so you don't need to copy or write down. You can just download the whole presentation later. So we define, so to say, and I'm helping governments as well as corporates to better deal with the crisis and go through this crisis. And we called it the 5F approach, and I will explain what the 5 Fs are. And basically, we look at how you keep yourself healthy and how you secure the growth in the future. So let me, yes. So I think despite the fact that you need to deal with all the urgency around health and safety, putting your, let's say, employees in the best light of security, and also look at the cost impact for cash management, very few companies are actually preparing for the recovery. And we believe this is very important. Answering the question that came before, nobody can see in the crystal ball. Nobody has a view on what will happen. So if you navigate across uncertainty, you need to think of scenarios. And I believe that you need to look at what is highly, let's say, unlikely and what is likely to happen. I think one of the key statements and learning I had from the interviews we had was that CEOs typically and management are very much focusing on taking decisions based on data. So they are analytically driven. They find all the evidence, they get the benchmark, they get the proof of concept, and then they take decisions, putting as much as possible, let's say, the evidence and reducing the risk to the max. The one thing that you have to do in a crisis, you cannot wait for the analysis to be done. You cannot wait that the uncertainty is gone. You need to take decisions in the middle of an environment that is totally uncertain. And that is, so to say, a very special environment that you need to learn how to act. Obviously, you expect the worst, you plan for the worst, and you hope the best. But make sure that you know what the worst is and that you design that scenario. Now, there are multiple uncertainties that are triggered by COVID-19, right? So first question is the confinement date. Based on that, either you have a business or you have zero business. If you cannot fly, if you cannot open your shop, you have zero business, or you have, let's say, progressive business, because if you open, you have a lot of restriction as well. Opening dates, how long can you open from 9 to 7? How does it work? How many people can you have in your shops? Who can get into your shop? Perhaps some segments of the population cannot, etc. So that is very important, let's say, uncertain to understand, and that has a huge implication on your business. The second is obviously the economic rebound, right? Date and speed, how fast, what kind of government support you will get to, let's say, sustain the economy. And this is a very important factor as well. Third is the shape of your ecosystem. Again, if you save yourself and you save your customer, probably if your supplier dies along the road, you have a problem, right? You cannot deliver. And last but not least, the new normal. So what kind of structural change, what kind of behavior? We were talking to one of the CEO of the major, let's say, media company, Italian company that produce all these wonderful entertainment formats, you know. And he said that they don't expect to have people coming back to entertainment in open space, because even if, let's say, government relaxes and let's say open up again, sports event, concert, you name them, entertainment, all kind of format. Would you tomorrow take your partner and your kids and go to a confined environment with hundreds of or thousands of people in a stadium or in an opera or in a, in a TV show? Probably not, because the trust will not be there. So the new normal, probably many people are, let's say, getting used to this format, living with a certain distance, making sure that they don't get sick, and probably there is one after a million that can still infect others. Probably you will be very careful, despite, so to say, what the government says. It will take time to go back to normal. And the question is, what is the normal? Or what structural change are we expecting? So this slide shows you the different level of uncertainty. So lower uncertainty, which means that definitely this will come, and high uncertainty on the right side, which tells you we don't know. We don't know. So you have the different levels. You have the society, you have behavior, and you have business models. So to explain the chart is, on the business model, pressure on companies to play a societal role. Is it uncertain? No, it's low uncertainty. So meaning that you have to do it. So every company needs to ask itself how they can contribute to the society. You see that the majority of the companies we interviewed, for instance, gave for free 1 month, 2 months, 3 months of subscription fees. Many have opened up their users, the capacity are limited. So companies are providing solidarity funds. You may have heard about SAS, the Scandinavian airline. They have put all their hostesses and personal staff into hospital beds, not doing, let's say, the emergency cases, but supporting. So very seldom company did not take a space. So are you going to just watch around you, or will you act? Therefore, you have a certain pressure to act socially. And I believe that this is something that will come. So I will not go through all the elements, but you can see that there are things on the left side you have to do, things on the right side, you need to think of scenarios. So nobody can tell you today how the curve would look like. Will you be in a V shape? That is, we have a prompt recovery. Will you have a U shape going down, going up later? Would you go a double dip, so to say? Are we expecting that the virus will wake up in September and we have again a crash? Or a major recession will come later on, people will lose a job or whatever. And last but not least, we have the L shape, a deep, long recession. So when the question was asked about the scenarios, this is exactly what you have to do. So you have to build the scenarios related to your business and think short-term and long-term how the impact will be in your company. Therefore, in all the cases, you need to deal with these questions, right? Free cash, free adoption, fast recovery, forward-looking, and also forward organization and communication. These are the 5 F's I'm talking about. This is all about what ADL is doing, design a framework, how to deal with that. When we made recently, I think this is the 30th of March, an assessment how companies are positioned themselves during the interviews. And you can see that free cash, 95% of the companies have done it, and very much focused on specific action to free cash in the short term, cash management. If you look at access free cash needs for recovery and forward looking, 65% have not even thought about it. So our idea is to make sure that you sustain and support also secure cash to look forward. If I take another example on, let's say, forward organization communication, implement new communication channels and power critical resources, 80% of the company have done it. if you look at, is it embedded the new way of working in nominal organization? 70% have not. So this, we call it dashboard of the 5 Fs, is, let's say, a toolbox helping companies, and all of you working in a company or interacting with other companies, you may encourage them to participate in the survey and see where they are as well. And that makes you think of how well you're prepared. And probably you can compare with your peers where you stand. So ultimately, we're talking about fast cash adoption, fast recovery, fast looking forward, and all covered by free cash management and organization communication. For that, you need, so to say, the 5 leaders. So one person dedicated to each F. So we believe that you will not be able to have one team managing, let's say, all the 5 work streams or framework we're discussing. You need to make sure that that you manage that each person by topic, and we need to make sure that you have a virtual room. We call that the 5F war room, and these 5 leaders should manage the companies. Here you can see in the key task of a war room. This again something we propose. You see the different color. You see the dark gray. You see the light gray. This is a supportive role, and this is a war room team member. That is a core team for each of the category and the parts of the company. For instance, in finance, you have a weekly cash flow update, bank governance, daily holding position, subsidies collection. All that is part of the finance and the free cash, and this is part of the war room. We can go to the next one. Define the frame of opportunities. This is looking forward. So one team should look at that. And define employees' needs and that policies. Also for travel, you need to rethink how you ramp up. That will be for the organization communication. So these are very important frameworks, and again, you can download them. And obviously, depending on which industry you are, the risk and impact will be different, right? So we cannot copy one model from one country to the other and from one industry to the other. So we have prepared, let's say, in each of these 5 Fs, and you see here the fast adoption, what are the critical tasks you have to do? I was asked before, how do you anticipate? How do you design your scenarios? By adopting exactly this tool. You can see it on the left side. You need to have in your business COVID-19 prediction. What do we mean with that? Assuming you are a telecom company and you have retail shops. If today they're closed, at one point they open up. If they open up, you need to make sure that you have all the logistics behind to supply what customer may buy in the shops. So you need, first of all, to inform your customer that the shops are opening. You need to predict how many employees you need per shop. Is it full-fledged? And how many people, agent, will you bring to the shop? That would very much depend on the customers, right? So you need to have some prediction tools. This is built on our own proprietary machine learning and I would say artificial intelligence platforms that we're using to predict how the ramp up will come. So we're not looking at backward looking. You can see on YouTube every day and on Facebook and all the platforms, the number of people that get infected, the number of people who dies. You can see that almost online real time, but this is all backward looking. What you need is a system that is forward looking. And based on that, you assess your supply risk management. You have the risk reporting, and you prioritize and implement your let's say activities, standard, strategic, and critical. Optimize your cost and cash, ensure critical supplies, etc. So I will not go through all the detail, but we have all the tools. That is what ADL does, is to propose these tools and help companies to implement. If you look at the fast adoption, I'm giving here the digital way of working before, during, and after. So this is, so to say, a recipe how today, before the crisis has hit you, during and after, how you could enable your employees to adopt the digital working tools. And I think in my introductory statement, I said that this is one of the key enabler to manage and evolve. Then you have the fast recovery, collection of data, integrated dashboard, visualization tools, review on the processes and reporting, right? And last but not least, you have the fast forward looking. So you need to have some assumptions and you need to predict which scenario you will have. Are you going to be in accelerated digitalization that will remain low and the business will remain global, which is status quo? Or are you expecting the protective smart city, I would say, with a very strong adoption of digital tools and technologies, right? Massive online data sharing, massive remote robotic factories, etc., and very local. So where are we? Are we going this way? Are we going this way? Are we going this way? And each of these scenarios, you need to adapt your strategy. And these are the extreme points that you could consider. So ultimately, we need to make sure that you have all your strategic lever in place. You have no regrets move. What you do will be remaining valid, but your strategic options are well prepared and they are based on a bold move. And last but not least, think of your insurances. I can go on and on, but ultimately what we help companies with is to, let's say, give you this perspective on helping you in setting up the 5F war room, executive workshop, scaling up digital way of working. So for the one who are interested in consulting or interested in knowing what consulting companies do, this is, so to say, our current framework with the 8 modules. You can pick and choose, so obviously you can leverage them all of them. So with that, I'd like to close. I can obviously continue much longer, but I gave you, let's say, starting with the summary of the 25 CEOs, and you can go to the detail in the report, and now helping companies in the different phases of the crisis, how to deal with that, and giving you also the tool of dashboard to better manage and anticipate the future. I hope this was helpful for you, and I'm open again for questions.
Great. So we had a comment earlier on, just as you started talking about the 5F War Room, from Abdelatif, and he was asking about Tunisia, where 90% of all enterprises are very small enterprises. So Abdelatif, I'm going to unmute you and see if you have any specific question, okay? And Abdelatif, if you can speak now, and we should be able to hear you. Hello, Abdelatif. Okay, can't hear you.
I think for small companies,
maybe
interpret a bit the question. So obviously, small companies, depending what they do, they are very much hit. So if you're working in the pharmaceutical business, if you're a pharmacy, probably you're making 5 times more revenue than in the past. If you're a supply of medicine, you're making a lot of business today as ever before. If you're in the supply of any, let's say, solutions, alcohol, I think never ever so much soap was used at both, right? So if you're in these kind of businesses, you're making a lot of money and it's in a good shape, no matter what size you are. There are some industries that are very much hit. The industry that, if you're an online business, small or big, you make a lot of money because people are buying online more than ever. If you're in the tourism business, and many countries are in that situation, also the country where I'm in today, obviously this is dead because you cannot travel. So what you need is to stimulate eventually the locals to organize their own trip within the country and just to stimulate, let's say, the uptake of the tourism. discover your country, and so you have to readapt in that, and probably this will restart, but of course it will be never reach even 1/3 or 1/4 of the level that is with classical, sort of say, seasons, right? That is clear. Some industries are very much hit. I think the education is one of the most critical one that has to reinvent itself by using digital tool, by using broadcast, by using enabling teachers to give classes remotely. So probably the positive thing is that the let's say spread and the use of digital platform will explode. Coming back now to the small businesses, I think government need to support and aid them in a way or another. The level of ads have been changing a lot. You could see today what Macron mentioned, between 500 and 1,500 euro up to 5,000 euro, depending what business you are. I think without that, if you stop the economy to save, because it's trade-off, right? Opening up letting the economy ongoing, you risk life of humans. This is the point, right? So it's extremely critical. So who would dare to keep the economy running, let's say, not to protect people? So you have then multiple extremes. Obviously, France is very much protective, putting the human life in the first stage and putting the confinement to the max, probably because the health system compared to other country is not as performant in terms of the number of critical, let's say, health room you may have to sustain people who are severely damaged by the virus, compared to Germany, Norway, or other countries, right? So they need to take more drastic measures, but that goes at the expense of the economy. And if it goes at the expense of the economy, you need to have a plan to support the most vulnerable companies, and the companies who are small, but in a difficult shape, perhaps, or the restaurants you can think of, etc., and give them at least a financial aid to go through that crisis. Otherwise, the crisis will be much more critical if you have the unemployment exploding. But the question is it a short-term unemployment or is it a long-term employment because companies went bankrupt in the meantime? So that is up to each government to define what aid they would put on the table. And for sure, most of the companies that are in industry that are hit by COVID are not responsible for that. It's a measure taken by the government just to secure the life of humans, as simple as that. Yeah, back to you.
Great. So Abdulatif said thank you. So I guess you answered the question. And there is another point made by Muhammad Ali, and he says that the best scenario to solve this big problem is for all scientists to find the right medicine for COVID-19 as soon as possible.
I think you have a lot of, let's say, solution on there. We know that the vaccine is the best solution, but this may take 18 months. So you cannot just continue business as usual without knowing that you have a solution. You have a lot of candidates. Mm-hmm. So you have always two things to look at. First of all, to measure, let's say, the effectiveness of a vaccine. Mm-hmm. And if it's proved very effective, you need to look at the side effects. And the side effects are not overnight. Mm-hmm. These may come in a few months or even years later. So before you let's say approve this kind of new medicine, in particular in a pandemic, because imagine apart from the challenge to produce mass market, let's say, vaccine, we're not talking about the 200,000 students that go to university or go to school and they need to get the vaccine. We're talking about the whole population or 2/3 of the population. So imagine the vaccine that you provide to the mass market have, let's say, a negative co-effect. What is better, to manage the economy a bit longer and to have enough certainty? Or would you play with the health of the whole population, probably putting vaccine to the market of millions of people, and eventually in 1 year or 5 years down the road, they all die or have a problem, severe problem later on? Which politician will take that risk? Which health organization will take that risk to try to fix a problem, short-term crisis, that may become a much bigger problem later on? Because right now, we're confined, the economy is down, but we're all living. I mean, we're talking about a very small percentage of the population that is dying. But if you put a vaccine to 2/3 of the population, something goes wrong, we're not talking about a few percentage here. We're talking about half of the population that may get an impact, right? So we need to be very careful with all these quick, dirty, let's say, quick and dirty announcement. We have a vaccine and tomorrow everybody will be saved. Not at all. We don't know. It's a major risk. It's a major risk. So if you're very, very sick, probably you could be a candidate. But if a healthy person gets a vaccine that is not really tested properly, I'm not sure that you will have a lot of candidates. I would probably take the risk to get infected because only 2% die from that, rather than be part of the 100% taking vaccine and have a problem later. So it's a very critical topic, I would say.
Yeah, it's a very important point you said. Okay, is asking about if you could just talk for a few minutes about Tunisia. If we focus on Tunisia, what do you think the new challenges are? What are the new sectors? And a few words about inclusive economy.
Well, yeah, I think multiple dimensions. So first of all, there is huge potential in terms of enabling. We have a very good education, and that education should be, let's say, an enabler as a platform to, and we 25% of the or 40% of the country is below 30, so to say. I'm quite safe to say so. So we have a young generation. They should become much faster digital native, and eventually taking these skills, because these skills will be quite relevant for the future. Second, if you decentralize production, if you centralize production again, and you also diversify your portfolio in your supply chain, probably production costs are not the only dimension. So you can probably be a bit more expensive than Asia, but be much closer to large, let's say, countries that are in demand, and probably will see Tunisia closer and more reliable, and in terms of diversifying the portfolio, good candidate. Third, if our economy is going digital, buying service digitally, consuming digital, has no border, because ultimately you can produce services, and also whether it's giving guitar classes, piano classes, English classes, you can think of whatever you want. Everyone has a kind of skill and is able to basically build capabilities. If today we learn to educate ourselves and develop ourselves through online classes, there is a huge market there. So if you can do it cost effectively with the right skills, why not? If you can do remote diagnostic of certain processes online, if we are able to work online, this opens a global market actually. So if we're fast enough in adapting and changing our procedures and remain creative and innovative, we have the whole world as a market for us. So I think this is something that we can think and rethink. When it comes to the government, I think again this and the previous crisis we had with regards to tourism, with terroristic attack, etc. I think it's important probably to refocus and make sure that we do not rely too much on one industry. We should also enable, let's say, the local tourism business. You know that France is the first country for tourism in Europe. I think only Paris receives, I don't know how many millions, a dozen of millions tourism a year. But you have a huge part of French people doing tourism in France. So can we further develop the tourism industry for the local? With different formats, with having, of course, it will never replace, as I said before, but it's a journey that we should think of. Other markets, another, look at the US, look at Germany, look at, sorry, not Germany, I was thinking of Spain, Italy, Spain. You have a lot of local tourism, right? So that is one of activities that can be considered. And I think in terms of export, there is no limits on the digital platform. This is my major recommendation. And as we have a young population, the hurdle to acquire digital skills is much lower than in the aging European countries.
Great, thank you. And I don't see any other questions. So if anybody wants to ask a question,
people are
please.
Tired and hungry.
maybe. If you have questions, please feel free to raise your hand or type them in the chat box. There is somebody who has asked for the presentation, but I think you've shared it in the chat here, and am I okay to post it on Facebook as well under the live video?
Let me also give you
the link to the LinkedIn, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So correct. Yes, I will give you.
Great. Okay, meanwhile, I'm just checking if there are any questions from anyone. And I would like to comment on what you said in the last couple of minutes, that the education needs to move online, and we as English language providers have moved online and delivering all our classes 100% online. So if you need to improve your English, then come and join us. And one more thing, I'd like to ask you and see if you agree with me that English is the language of global communication and business communication, and I feel that these days English will become very necessary skills to be able to find a job abroad. And as you said, it's a huge world now, digital world. There are no borders, and you can look for jobs abroad and elsewhere.
And be creative. That you can offer again. I mean, if you spend some time with the internet and see what kind of services are offered, think how far from this service you are in getting. I mean, look at the number of yoga hours that are being consumed right now. I'm just taking a very simple service in Europe.
Yeah.
So how long will it take you to become a yogi? A couple of years, probably 5 years. But then it's a lifetime job, and you don't need to do it your full-time job. You can do it on top, right? So as many Europeans do. And I can give you multiple jobs like that. So educational one, and be creative and look what others are doing. So if the whole world, and there is a huge internet community living only from, think of the influencer, think of whatever, right? Yes, invest. Look at what kind of aspiration you have, what is driving you, acquire the skills online as well, and then learn fast and replicate and help others. And you can make out of that a business, right? Today it's possible. The only thing you need is interconnection. And by the way, coming back to what the government should do, we need to reduce to the max the digital divide. So if you should invest in a critical infrastructure, we need to have a very solid internet, because it's the only way to stay connected to the new world, in particular in these times. You asked for the presentation. I put on the chat room the link, and you can go and download the presentation, read about the report. So you have basically the two presentations I used today in a written format, all the details.
And I'll just ask Kabir if you could post this in on the Facebook under the live video for the comments, because some people have asked also for that. Great. Okay, well, we don't have any other questions. There are a lot of thank you going in, and great ideas and insights, and thank you very much for being with us today, and the very interesting presentation, and definitely inspiring and helpful.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much for asking the questions as well. Thank you. The more interactive, the more fun it is for me as well. And yes, I wish you a lot of health. Take care, and see you in the future.
See you in the future. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for the invitation as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.